Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Arlington Esports Stadium and Expo Center tonight for our Police Chief Candidate Forum. My name is Trey Yelverton, and I'm our City Manager here in Arlington. And one of the duties that I have as City Manager is to hire our key personnel, including the Police Chief. And so we've been going through a process over the last several months since Police Chief Will Johnson retired and left our city to find the new leader who will help lead our troops and our community towards the future of policing and help us on a day-to-day basis keep our community safe. And so I want to make sure that tonight I give you a little bit of background. What we've been doing is recruiting nationally, both internally and externally, for a new police chief. We had 74 candidates that we received back in the late summertime with the help of a consulting group, a police consulting group called the Bowman Group. We did a lot of outreach in various places across the country, identified 74 candidates that came in. From that, myself and the consultant and people in my office that helped me with our Deputy City Manager crew, we reviewed all that material and discussed and initially narrowed our candidate list down to 24 candidates. Following that, there was additional research and information that we went through, more background check, more interviews by different sets of individuals to narrow that list of 24 down to 10. And then from those 10, we had one candidate who respectfully withdrew. It's a candidate from Baltimore and some of the, Buffalo. And some of the COVID-related transportation challenges weren't going to work for him, so he withdrew. But we had 9 candidates that continued to advance through our process. And so when we had to our 9 finalists about 3 weeks or so ago, these guys all went through a very rigorous process. We had numerous community and employee panels that did interviews with our candidates virtually all day long. We had an employee panel that was selected from police employee labor leadership to have an employee panel where all of our candidates went through. We had a collegial panel of other folks who are on our team that the police chief will work with, the police chief, the fire chief, the IT director, our legal advisor, and such that helped advise from that perspective. We had 2 community panels that represented neighborhood interest, stakeholder community interest in Arlington that populated 2 different groups, one panel of 5 and one panel of 4. And then we also had some regional police chiefs from the Dallas-Fort Worth area that are leading very progressive organizations for people who are sitting in that chair and other communities to also meet with our candidates. Those were all done on individual bases, and we rotated throughout the day. So that has then led us from a group of 9 that has led us to 5. And so tonight, and over the last day or two, I've gotten a chance to get to meet these individuals a lot better than I have through this process to date. But I thought it was really important that the community also get a chance to see our candidates and to ask questions of our candidates. So yesterday and today we've been doing kind of internal interviews, but tonight we'll have an external interview. And we're here at the Expo Center for those that you could attend, but we're also streaming on the city's website as well as the city's My Arlington TV channel. So hopefully we're getting everybody who's interested in this process to be able to observe and take a look at who our candidates are and how they will answer some of these questions that you all have submitted. We've received several questions that we're going to go through, and we're going to give each candidate a chance to answer those. We also are going to give each candidate a chance to say a couple of minutes about themselves. We'll go through the questioning, and then at the end, we'll let everybody wrap with a brief statement as well. So this is our opportunity, hopefully the community's opportunity, to put a name with faces, to hear a little bit about these professionals' background and perspectives as it relates to community-based policing and social reform, police reform, social justice issues in the nation and in our community, and we'll get things rolling. And so I was planning originally to kind of facilitate this myself, but I decided just to do the opening because I really need to watch these candidates just like you all. So I'm going to step out to the audience so I can watch and learn from what we're going to hear from our folks. And I've asked our Community and Legislative Affairs Director, Mr. Jay Warren, who's done this a lot in his background from a news crew leader in the Virginia area, and he's going to help facilitate the discussion to take the questions that you all have asked and get some perspective from our candidates. So I appreciate your input. I hope you'll learn something about this as well, and I'm eager to hear about how things go from here. So Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get it started.
We're so glad to have all of you here with us today. Additionally, we're so glad to have the candidates here to answer the questions that many of you have already submitted and the questions that we'll be receiving throughout the course of the night. Let me begin by introducing our 5 candidates, and I'll do them in the order as they're kind of next to me. So I'll start with Jaime Ayala. He is the Assistant Police Chief at the Arlington Police Department. To his right, we have Colonel Al Jones of the Baltimore County Police Department. We have Assistant Chief Kevin Colby of the Arlington Police Department. We have Commander Jason Lando of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. And we have Deputy Chief Tariq McGuire of the Arlington Police Department. Welcome, gentlemen all. Thank you for being here tonight and answering these questions that we have. Now, these finalists will have an opportunity, as we've mentioned, to respond to questions submitted by the community. And we think it is a very important part of the process for the community to hear directly from the candidates and for the candidates to address the topics that are important to Arlington residents. The questions may be submitted throughout the evening by completing a question card, which are available from our human resources staff. And staff, if you could, either raise your hand or something so you see back in the back. If you have a question that you'd like to write down, they will have those cards. They can also, once you're finished writing it down, if you'll hold your card up, they'll be able to come by and pick that card up and bring it up to me to be able to ask the question. You can also submit a question virtually if you'd like, using the QR code, the big code above me and on the other side as well. And that will be displayed, of course, on the screen throughout the course of the evening. We do ask that questions and topics should be broad enough so that all of the candidates have the same opportunity to provide a thoughtful response. In consideration of time, questions that are similar or duplicative in nature or they're very specific to an individual candidate may be asked under a broader, more common theme umbrella, if you will, so that all 5 candidates have an equal opportunity to respond. And we will begin the evening by asking questions that were submitted online throughout the course of the last week, and then, of course, include questions, too, that were submitted during the event. And we'll move through those as many unduplicated questions as we can during the time that is allowed this evening. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the question that is presented to the group. And there's a big clock back there, gentlemen. If you could watch that and try and keep your answers within that 2-minute window, that would be fantastic, so we can get through as many questions as possible over the course of this evening. There will be a rotation from the candidates in terms of the order in which they answer, so that will be fair as we go through the process. And then, of course, at the end of the forum, we will have each candidate provide a closing comment for our audience. A couple of house rules I'll go through quickly as time is of the most importance here. Should you need to take a call here in the audience, we ask that you please step out to take that call. As mentioned previously, questions will be submitted via question card or online to be read by me. And in accordance with state and local regulations, as many of you are already doing, we're very appreciative of that. We do ask that you social distance and wear your masks if you're out in the audience. And then finally, gentlemen, we're going to be here for 2.5, 3 hours. If at some point you need to take a quick break, please feel free to step off stage and then come back into the room. I think that is certainly more than acceptable. So, having said all of that, let's start with our opening comments from each of the candidates, and we'll start here. And by the way, I asked them all how they would like for me to address them by title or last name or first name, and it was unanimous. They'd all like for me to address them by their first name, so I will do that. And Jaime, why don't you start with us?
Thank you very much. Good evening. I appreciate everybody taking time out to come and get to know us a little bit better. I've been with the department here in Arlington for 31 and a half years, so I've had the opportunity to know where we came from, where we're going, and who our stakeholders are, and just have grown in the organization throughout my career. I think tonight is really important to give you the opportunity to get to know who we are, and many of you do, those here locally from the local candidates. But there's three things I want to share with you that are important to me. Well, first off, I'm a family man. I'm a father of 3 and 1 grandchild. I'm married, and my family comes from a history of public service. It's our calling. It's been my calling, and I've just been very blessed to have been able to serve here in Arlington, Texas, in the police department. One of the most important things to me in what I value and who I am is integrity. In this profession, if you lose your integrity, it is extremely difficult to recover. And so everything we do in each and every day, our community, our workforce, our stakeholders have to know that they can trust what we're doing and what we tell them. I think it's critically important to have accessibility, not only as an up-and-coming through the ranks, but as a police chief. Your community and your workforce need to know that they can approach you and ask questions and be in the know and not be uncertain about what we're doing or where we're going. And then lastly, we need to build trust in the community. We need to build trust in our organization and continue to build that trust, and we can't do that without transparency. And so with transparency, we begin to grow the trust that we have in our community, and we get to build off the trust that we have in our workforce so that we all know what the game plan is and we all know where we're going. So I'm extremely honored to be here with these men tonight and share my experiences and share who I am so that you can get to know us better beyond where we've been. And again, I thank you and I look forward to this evening and the questions.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Let's now go to his right. And Al, will you give your opening statement?
Thank you. First, I want to say good evening, Arlington. It's truly a pleasure to be up in front of you, to share some of my thoughts and some of my ideas. I've been in law enforcement for 25 years with Baltimore County Police Department. We are the 18th largest agency in the country. We have 1,914 sworn members, another 500 professional staff. I believe through the 25 years of policing has helped me develop as a person to be able to come here to Arlington, to be a partner to not only to the community, but to also to the men and women inside the agency. I think it's so important now, more than ever, that leadership and the way things are going across the country, that leadership is so important. And I want to bring that leadership piece here to Arlington, not only within the agency, but along with the community. I want to partner up with them. Right now, I am the Bureau Commander of our Community Relations Bureau. And what I do every day is go out and I build trust and relationships, and I want to make Baltimore County legitimate within the eyes of the community. I want to make sure that I bring that same thought, that same passion that I have out in that community, that I want to bring it here to Arlington. When I go out to these community meetings, I talk about trust. And with trust, it has to be transparency. We have to talk about respect. We have to talk about engagement. We have to talk about accountability. And I think all of those things are important. But I just wanted to say again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to the lively discussion tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Al. Kevin, would you like to give your opening remarks?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Kevin Colby, and I'm currently the interim chief. And I've served here as the assistant chief for the past 5.5 years. By way of background, when I was 14, I knew that I wanted to be in law enforcement. So I started my career after graduating from Texas Tech with a accounting degree and spent a year in public accounting. And I joined the Dallas Police Department for just under 4 years on patrol and as a SWAT officer. I then accepted an appointment to the FBI, so I spent 28 years in the FBI in various capacities, rising through the ranks. 14 years of that I spent on the criminal side, and then 14 years on the national security side working counterintelligence, terrorism, cyber investigations. During that time, almost everything that I did in 28 years, I worked with state and local law enforcement as well as federal agencies. I had the pleasure of working in many states around the United States. I had the pleasure of working in many countries and got to see some of the best and the worst of military, law enforcement, and humanity. Coming here was a great pleasure and an honor and a national surge to be selected as Assistant Chief in 2015, and serving in that capacity was great. I would tell you that my message is everything that I have done around the world, everything that I've done with law enforcement comes to one thing, and it's building relationships. It's all relational, whether we're dealing with the community, whether we're dealing with other law enforcement agencies, we're dealing with our own citizens, we're dealing with our workforce. And I'm a relational leader that brings many years of vast experience and knowledge and leadership to this organization. So I appreciate the opportunity to hear from me today, and I look forward to more conversation. Thank you.
Now we'll go to Jason.
Thank you. I'm Jason Lando from Pittsburgh. It's an honor to be here. It was a very competitive process, so to be one of the 5 finalists, it is an honor, so thank you for having me. A little bit about me. I'm born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yes, currently a Steelers fan. That's up for negotiation if I get the job. For the past 21 years, I've been with the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. Worked my way up through patrol, did some undercover investigative work. I was a supervisor at various levels of the organization. And then about 6 years ago, I was promoted to the rank of commander in Pittsburgh. Our commanders are similar to, I believe, deputy chiefs here. We run the precincts around the city. And I inherited a Zone 5 police station, which if anyone were to Google Pittsburgh Police Zone 5, it was a really rough area. There was a disproportionate amount of violent crime, a lack of trust between police and the community. There was really no community engagement. The officers had a really rough time when they came to work. They didn't feel supported or respected, and the public also didn't feel like they were getting the services they deserved. So for the past several years, my mission at Zone 5 was to change the dynamic and change the way that we as the police interact with the community. So I give a lot of credit to the officers. They were being very innovative and open-minded, but we created some programs and initiatives that really changed that whole dynamic. We were able to drive complaints against police officers down by 40%. We saw an average of 10% reduction in violent crime across the district, and we were making relationships with the community that we had never made before. We were marching alongside the community in peace rallies. We created working groups where we came together with youth in a non-enforcement way in the schools, and we let them talk freely about their experiences with police. Our officers would later encounter these same officers these same young people out in the street, and they reported total different kind of dynamic in the way they interacted. There was a lot more cooperation out in the street, and generally officers just reported that they felt less stress and they felt more supported. So that's something that I really carry with me. It's something that's very important to me, supporting our officers when they do the right thing, making sure we give the community a voice. And then I'll just leave you with this. One of the things I do in my role as commander is developed a procedural justice training program for the department. And it really circles around 4 pillars, and I really try and weave that into the fabric of what we do every day at work, whether it's interacting with officers or the community. And those 4 pillars are voice, neutrality, respect, and transparency. And I think that those are kind of the principles that guide me every day as I go about my daily work, and that's the same type of philosophy I would implement if I was the chief here. So thank you for having me.
Mic situation figured out here, and before we get back to you for your next question, and let's end now with Tariq.
Dr. Martin Luther King said, "If a man has not found something that he is willing to die for, then he is not fit to live." So Dr. King was not talking about a physical death, but Dr. King was talking about the connection between human sacrifice and living for something greater than yourself. I will tell each of you that I have dedicated my entire adult life, my professional life, to this city and this organization through public safety and leadership. I have a broad breadth of experience in public safety leadership and management, serving in field operations and support operations, partnering with other team members in our city and our community as we face challenges of violent crime, and also created great relationships in community police relations. Not only have I served here locally, but I've also had an opportunity to impact police reform across our nation, where I've worked with police departments throughout the United States on issues surrounding police reform, developing public policy and procedures. I want you to know tonight that I'm very appreciative of each of you. Not only each of you, because you have helped me grow through my career at this police department. I'm honored to serve along the brave men and women of the Arlington Police Department, but also I want you to know this experience tonight that I'm grateful for is personal for me. I live in this community. I raised my family in this community. And not only that, but I've heard many of your stories, and I want to be your next police chief. I am committed to this city. I'm committed to this community. I look forward to this discussion on tonight, and I'm honored to sit here with these police executives. So thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, for your opening remarks. Let's begin with our question and answer segment here, and we do have a lot of questions to get through. Our clock is not currently working, so I'm going to put you on your best behavior. Try and limit your answers to that 2-minute window, and don't filibuster yourself, as they would say, while we're trying to get it fixed. And Al, let's start with you on this first question, and then we'll go down the row. We did get several questions about the issue of accountability, which has certainly been something that's been in the news quite a bit of late. We got one question from a member of the Noble organization, as well as one from Jason Smith. So if I could put that under an umbrella question for you, will you hold officers accountable for their actions, such as unprofessionalism, unfair treatment to citizens, and the use of excessive force?
Oh, absolutely. But Hers, before I start answering the negative side of the question, I think we probably should think about the positive things. I know that these men and women in Arlington handle over 200, 300,000 calls for service a year. And these men and women do an excellent job going in and day in and day out and serving the citizens of Arlington great. But you know what? There are going to be times where our officers do make mistakes. What I will say here is, listen, if you make a mistake, own up to it. I prefer that you own up to that mistake, and let's get past it. We have an internal affairs process. Let's send it to that internal affairs process. I think that's about the accountability piece. But one thing I am going to say, and I'm very, very passionate about this, one thing I cannot live with is someone who does not tell the truth and who is not truthful in how they're conducting their business. Those officers, and I'm going to say it right up straight because I think it's important for the community to understand, and it's also important for the officers to understand. If you actually lie on this department, and I think a lot of officers, or most of the officers, or all the officers will agree with me, that you lose your utility to the agency and you can't be a part of the Arlington Police Department if I am chief. So it's about accountability. We have to make sure that we are holding ourselves to a standard that is well beyond what our community expects of us. And I expect that every single officer goes out there and do their job professionally like I know they can. But like I said, if it's a mistake, own up to it. We can deal with it on accountability end. But please, do not go out and tell a lie through an investigation, because I think that's where we actually have to separate.
Thank you for that. Kevin?
First exposure to a lack of accountability or accountability to law enforcement was in 1991 when I was a young FBI agent in Los Angeles. It's a case called Rodney King. I was there during the Rodney King incident when 4 LAPD officers were not held accountable for the excessive force. I was part of a discussion with the United States Attorney and Department of Justice about what the FBI was going to do about holding these local law enforcement officers accountable. We eventually indicted those 4 officers, and they were prosecuted in federal court. I will tell you from my experience that I've worked a lot of civil rights investigations and investigations against officers. When I came into this department, I made an assessment and looked at our accountability. And I will tell you that I am very confident, with high degree of confidence, that this department here does an outstanding job of holding our officers accountable through our policies, our procedures. And I think the same thing. And I've always said this to the officers when I talk to them. If you do something wrong, please, please do not lie about it. If you lie about it, I can't help you. You've jeopardized your integrity, and most likely it's going to be termination. We are human. My officers are human, and they're going to make mistakes. And all the oversight that we have and the stress that they have on these officers, from body-worn cameras to iPhones put in their face, they're held accountable. But they can make mistakes, and they're human. And so I like to know that if my officers are truthful, we hold you accountable. If you make a mistake, that you're honest about it, and sometimes they deserve grace. Thank you.
Jason.
Not getting anything. Good now? Okay. Yeah, I actually agree with both of my colleagues up here. I'll go a little further. For me, integrity is absolutely everything. Anytime I've moved around from one station to another throughout my career, the first conversation I always have with the officers is, just like Kevin said, you're going to make mistakes. We're human, and policing is an art. It's not a science. So when you make those mistakes, just tell me about them, and we'll get through it together. So for me, integrity is absolutely key. If you lie, I just have no tolerance for that at all. So I had a mentor once when I was a young supervisor, and I was asking, how do you deal with discipline? Because you don't want to overly discipline and ruin people's morale, but you don't want to under-discipline and then they don't get the message. So this mentor of mine said, always ask yourself, was it a mistake of the mind or was it a mistake of the heart? And if it's a mistake of the mind, like someone's having a bad day, maybe they wreck a police car, maybe they use a curse word towards someone in the heat of the moment on a call. We treat those differently than we treat mistakes of the heart. And a mistake of the heart is you lie, you steal, you use excessive force, you plant evidence. So I've kind of used that as my guiding light throughout my career. And when officers make a mistake of the mind, I prefer to use counseling, coaching, mentoring, and retraining. But when officers make a mistake of the heart, and they do that with malice, I have no use for that at all, and they can't be a police officer. So that's kind of my philosophy and how I guide my decision making.
Thank you. Tariq.
Thank you. So will I hold police officers accountable? I will absolutely hold police officers accountable for misconduct. But I think that accountability starts at the point of hiring. It starts at the point of us identifying the right people for the job and the position that reduces our risk of police misconduct. Absolutely, officers do a dangerous job every single day protecting and serving our communities. And we also must be accountable as leaders. So I want to talk about a little bit about the department's robust review process as it relates to accountability structurally. Every use of force that an officer has to do in our police department is reviewed thoroughly by the chain of command. That officer has to document the force that was used to include what the outcome of that situation was. And so not only is the officer accountable, but the supervisor is accountable in reviewing that process to ensure that the officer is performing to the level and the standards that their force is reasonable and it is justified. And finally, we must be accountable as police executives. We must understand the balance of fairness and equity as it relates to officers. We must address negative behavior when it happens, to address pattern and practice. And in turn, then we are accountable to the community as we are accountable internally.
Wonderful, thank you. And Jaime, will you wrap us up for this question, please?
Absolutely. I think accountability is one of the values that any organization needs to possess and have in their mission statement and in their vision and their strategic plan. I'm originally from South Texas in the all-American city of Edinburgh. I came to Arlington to attend UTA, and I knew I wanted to be a police officer, and I began to spend time as a civilian ride-out once a year with the department. And through the conversations with the officers and seeing where the new leadership was going, I wanted to work here in Arlington and was blessed to have been hired and have spent quite a bit of time here. And through my years, I've seen increases in accountability here in Arlington. The culture has changed from where it was 30 years ago. The leadership that has worked through this organization, many going off into other organizations, have made sure that we hold our officers to the highest levels of accountability. Because if we don't hold ourselves accountable, the community is going to come in and hold us accountable. And if you look at the history of our internal affairs complaints, of our investigations, most of them are initiated internally by our own people, because we want to hold ourselves to the highest level, to the highest standards, where integrity will not be questioned by those we serve. And when an event occurs, and it's been said, we're human. We go from the public to the police, but we're part of the public, and we do make mistakes. And when we make those mistakes, we have to get out in front of it, and we have to be transparent in how we're handling it. And I think that we've done a really good job over a number of years at continuing to increase the levels of accountability internally, starting at the top. And there's more that we can do in partnership with the community as we continue in this profession.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen, for those answers. Let's get to our second question. This was put in by the NAACP, our local chapter here, and we'll start with you, Kevin, as we go down the row here. What is your plan for identifying and weeding out recruits and existing officers who have a propensity for violence based on racial, gender, and other social biases?
Great question. And I think it really goes with the recruiting and starting and how we hire. You know, we do such a robust recruiting process, background investigation, interviews, polygraphs, psychological exams. So, and we try to hire individuals that have that good moral character and fiber, that have integrity, that are honest. And it all starts with our recruits. And then we put them through intensive training, almost double what is required by the state of Texas in TCOL. And what we do is we spend tremendous amount of hours talking about implicit biases, talking about making sure that we all know that we have some biases of the way we were raised or events that have happened to us. But the real key is if you can recognize it and accept that there may be some biases of what you've been exposed to as a young person, and understand that you can't act upon that you have to make sure that we treat everybody fair and equitable, and make sure that whatever biases that you may have grown up with, that you don't act upon that. And it really starts with the training. It starts with recruiting the right individuals with the right mindset, with moral character, and then continuing on throughout their careers. We continually look for training, opportunities to train all of us continually to make sure that we are equitable, that we're fair, and we're just in everything that we do.
Thank you, Kevin. Jason?
We have to start with the recruitment process and just making sure that we're doing a very detailed and intensive background search, background investigation on anyone before we hire them. If they have a history in their past of racial discrimination, of racist behavior, biased behavior, then right there automatically that would be a disqualifier. And again, after they come on the job, it's all about holding people accountable. I did want to just kind of follow up on the comment about implicit bias. That's it's a very real thing. Everybody has it, and I think that the only way to make things better is to do training, and you can't just do a one and done training. Biases affect all of our decision making every day, whether you're a police officer, whether you're a community member. So you have to do that ongoing training. But then when if officers don't act in accordance to their training and they continue to go out and they make bias-based decisions, then they have to be held accountable. And sometimes that accountability means showing them the exit to the organization, because ultimately the legitimacy that the public has, the faith they have in our organization, is damaged when we allow officers to go out and act in a way that's incongruent with our values. by making those biased decisions. So again, it really starts with the vetting process to become a police officer, and then once someone has joined our ranks, just making sure we're staying vigilant in training and holding officers accountable.
Tariq, how would you answer that question?
Sure, so I absolutely agree with the points that have been made. But I think as we look at policing today, I want to draw a clear correlation between someone that is racist and someone that is biased. I think it's two completely different things. Someone that's racist does not like someone or hate someone based off of their background, culture, and of course they treat them differently based off of that. We do not condone that in our organization. When we talk about bias, as Chief Kobe commented earlier, we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences. And I think those are things that are very important for us to admit and acknowledge early on. And so how do we address some of those issues today? I think it's important that as we engage the community, as we train recruits, that we put them in different environments around different people so they can understand how to meet people where they are, what their backgrounds and experiences are to help them make better informed decisions. As we move forward through our training process, not only do I think that it's important to go through the implicit bias training that we do in this organization, but it's also important to bring people in from different perspectives of communities to share with our recruits and to share with our officers and have critical conversations about what their backgrounds and where they come from as well. It's a personal decision to be better. And so I think that as we continue to create the culture in our organization and address the challenges and issues that we are, then we have a great opportunity to eliminate some of those biases and identify them and deal with them as public safety professionals.
Jaime.
You know, unnecessary or excessive use of force is absolutely not tolerated in our community or in our police department. And we see evidence of this occurring across the nation. We need to recognize and understand that our employees are our absolute most valuable resource. And they come into the organization after being recruited and trained in a variety of cultural diversity and implicit bias training. They get it in the academy, and then they have to practice it in the field. But we're human. They get all kinds of equipment. If you look at a police officer, you see a weapon, a taser, OC spray, you see all of these things. And they come from different backgrounds. And they have to learn different cultures and what's appropriate in those cultures and not. But the one thing we don't issue is a heart. Their heart comes from where they grew up, for what was instilled in them by either their parents or whoever raised them. And we make mistakes because we're human. And so when we have an incident where there's potentially unnecessary or maybe more force than is necessary, we also need to look at what the root cause of that was and understand, because we invest so much in our employees. It's been often said, if my mind could forget what my eyes have seen. And every day these officers go out, especially during this pandemic, and are having to deal with threat and risk. We have officers being assassinated across the country, and that's in the back of their minds. And so we need to continue to support and train them and address issues as they surface, because going back to the notion of accountability, we will hold them accountable. And if it's not a survivable event, we will deal with the officer. But there are times when we need to support them as well, because one of those pillars in 21st century policing is officer wellness. And we know that we're human, we make mistakes, and we need to deal with things evenly.
And finally, Al.
For the question. So here it is. When we start talking about racial and gender bias and looking at those different things, I have to agree with Jaime. We can train all day long. We can train on implicit bias. We can train on cultural competency training. We can go through all of those training. We can do it year after year after year. But the problem is that we can only train the mind. We can't train the heart for them to actually. So we have to make sure that we're holding that heart accountable. We also have to have a very robust early warning system in place, so that if we can consistently see a pattern of behavior that is inconsistent with our policies, our procedures, and how our community expects us to behave, and pretty much our African American and Latino community expects us to deal with them in a different way. We have to make sure that we are holding these officers absolutely accountable to their behavior. Here's the other thing that I think it's very important. We have to have these open and honest and courageous conversations. And not only with the community, but we also have to have these candid conversations within the agency. When you can have those candid conversations about racial issues that we're going to deal with, whether it's in the community or whether it's inside the agency, those are important things. That's how you actually move past a lot of this racial bias that we're seeing. And here it is. If somebody's acting on their racial bias, we actually have to hold them accountable. And through that early warning system, if it's consistent behavior, we have to actually make that separation. And that's how we actually do it, and that's how I think it should be done.
Thank you so much for that. Let's get to our third question now, and we'll begin with Jason with this question. And I think we've heard a lot about mental illness and or mental stability issues already, and that is a national theme that is out there. Inez Roach asked this question. Police officers are put under a lot of mental and emotional stress as it relates to their job. Do you think a once-a-year mental or emotional evaluation would be beneficial for our officers? Why or why not? And Jason, will you kick us off with that one, please?
Thank you. We have to do a better job of taking care of our officers, but I don't know that a once-a-year evaluation is necessarily the metric that we should use. I think what we should do is start to really make officer wellness like a day-to-day type of thing, whether it's a physical fitness program. I know one department recently won an award through a national award for building a program within the department where officers on duty had time to work on their physical fitness, and it really lifted morale and officer wellness in the department. They saw less injuries, less people going off on stress-related injuries. So I think more so than just like a once-a-year evaluation, it has to really be a philosophy in the department. The other thing I think that we need to make sure is that we have a robust peer support program. Like my colleague said earlier, our officers, whether it's in Arlington or Pittsburgh or anywhere, our officers see more in the average day than most people see in their whole lifetime as far as suffering and things that cause stress and anxiety. So we need to have a peer support program so those officers have someone to lean on and someone they can go to. And the other thing I think, and I know some officers think this to be a little bit controversial, but there are departments across the country now that are seeing success with actually having trained social workers embedded in the department for the officers. So they really become part of the culture of the organization, and those officers, when they come in from bad calls or they see something terrible or they experience the death of a small child, they have actually someone in the station that can be there for them and work through some of those issues. So I think it can't hurt to do annual evaluations, but I think more importantly is how we're treating our officers all throughout the year. Wonderful.
Thank you. Tariq?
Absolutely. I think that there's so much we can do to continue to support our officers. Several statements have been made reference police officer mental health and the challenges that officers deal with on a daily basis as they respond to calls for service. I think that this department has championed supporting officers in mental health with a robust plan. We've had a commitment from our city leadership to support our Blue Chip program that allows our officers to go get mental health practice for free. Not only that, years ago we made a commitment to our crisis intervention team through the One Mind campaign through IACP to not only support our mental health response externally, but also invest in our officers internally. I do not think that there is enough that we could do. I think this is something we should continue to be looking at and evolving at. I think that years ago, when you talked about mental health with law enforcement officers, it was something that was kind of left out the side door. But now we have talked about it consistently in our training. We talk about it in our briefing process. We also have mitigated our organization from an 8-hour shift to a 10-hour shift that reaches national standards and best practices. And as other colleagues have stated during this time, this has been very challenging due to COVID and response that has been very challenging on our officers as they responded to communities. And so we have a city that has supported us ensuring that officers have the resources that we need. But I think it's something that we need to continue to work on and look at over time as we face this profession and the future challenges that we have.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And Jaime, do you want to go next?
You know, to come into the organization, you have to have a psychological test, an exam. And there are certain areas of the organization where you have to have a secondary psychological exam based on your assignment. But to really look at testing every officer every year, I don't think is the answer to what is occurring across our country with force issues. I think that dealing with stress is critically important, and we have a number of programs that have been mentioned before to help support our officers when they experience a crisis, when they experience a critical incident where they're mentally impacted, maybe suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And we do have a very strong support system in our mayor and council and our city manager's offices, ensuring that we have what we need to provide to the officers to maintain their mental health. Because remember, I said earlier, we're all human. Every one of these officers goes through the same types of trials and tribulations that each one of our community members goes through, whether it's divorce, whether it's loss of a child, where it's a miscarriage in the family, and those have an impact on us as people. And so as supervision, we need to have tripwires in place that when we see an employee suffering, not just an officer, we have many support employees, civilian employees who are subjected to the same kind of crisis, and we need to continue to monitor them as well. And as we monitor them, we need to make sure that we guide them and offer them the support. And the Blue Chip program is one way that they don't have to reveal to the organization that they need some help, because it is okay to not be okay. And so we need to continue to look for ways, and the Unity Council is asking some great questions with the Law Enforcement Committee about psychological testing. And I think we need to continue to have the conversation so we can better work towards what is best in our profession when it comes to mental health.
Thank you, Jaime. Al?
So I think that, you know, as you start looking at mental illness and emotional and whether or not officers should be tested every year, I don't believe that that's the answer. I think that as supervisors and as leaders, we have to do a better job of taking care of our people. Think about this. Our men and women see the most horrific, tragic situations day in and day out. That's going to have a major impact on how they carry out their duties on a daily basis. I think we have to do a better job of documenting it. Just think about this. An officer goes to a traffic situation or a fatality accident where there's a little kid who has been injured terribly. That's going to have an impact on them, especially if they have kids. And I think as supervisors, we have to do a better job of monitoring our officers and making sure that we're paying attention to them daily. We got to have those conversations. How are you today? So that you can actually get them to talk about those things. The other thing that I'm going to suggest is that we have to start looking at a 360 approach. We have to start looking at the mental, the physical, the spiritual. And what I mean is not religious, just having something, a being that is higher than us, and then the last piece of a financial piece of it. I think if we could take that 360 approach, I think we can actually get our folks on a path that is going to be to have that wellness that they need. The other thing that I'm going to suggest, and I think it's very important, I think we should start looking at as an organization and as a city to have some type of organizational psychologist on board to help us get through some of these challenging times that we're dealing with. And I think that's going to be a better approach when we're talking about officer wellness and trying to move them forward.
Thank you for that. And Kevin?
You know, our culture has changed a lot. When I started off in the Dallas Police Department and you were involved in a critical incident, a fatality accident, you were kind of shown weakness as a person, as a police officer, if you had any feelings about it. So we built this wall and this numbness. I think in today, coming back 30-something years later, we began to realize that a lot of these police officers, humans, were going through divorces, going through issues, and that it's affecting our work environment. And so we're much more bolder and brave to talk about some of our feelings. So I'll tell you, in Arlington, after every critical incident, we have an after-action report. So we get together, all our officers, and we begin to debrief and talk. Now, it's not mandatory, but if you have some feelings of something that you saw that may be disturbing, particularly as a young officer and starting a career, we want to hear about it. We talked a little bit about our Blue Chip program, a great program started here at Chief Johnson and his vision, where it's just a simple chip that you can get anonymous psychological services. We just started the Blue Fit program. I'm really proud of that. We're in almost our first 12 weeks, where I've authorized 25 officers, for whatever reasons, have lost the motivation from physical fitness. We've got testimony they lost 25 pounds, 3 or 4 inches on their waist. I've allowed them to do this on duty, 25 officers, so they can jumpstart their CrossFit fitness, and when they become more physically fit, emotionally they're going to be better employees and the community is going to be beneficial. And what I just authorized is in January, we're going to do another 25 officers. So to answer the question specifically, I think we do a pretty good job in this department of trying to watch each other's back when it comes to the stressors and post-traumatic that we do. I don't know that I would be specifically wanting to do a yearly evaluation, especially testing, but what I would be open to is, just like we have a chaplain in our department, is maybe hiring a psychologist that makes sure that goes to our briefings and looks for officers that may need just a voice to talk to. And so I would be willing to explore something that may be for 3 or 4 years, that maybe every officer just voluntarily gets time from their assignment to go talk to a psychologist for their stressors. Thank you.
So by the way, folks at home and here in the room, thank you so much. We are getting a lot of questions and a lot of very good questions, and we appreciate that, and please keep them coming. One that is clearly resonating with the folks that are watching and that have interest in this process is the relationship between police department and our police officers and our residents in our community. And I've got a question here from Gamal Abdel Hafez, one from Stefan Powdrill, from the NAACP, from Billy Wilson, from members of the Noble organization, all around that theme of community relations. So let me kind of summarize that into one question for you, and Tarek, we'll begin with you. What best practices have you utilized or would you utilize in the African American, the Latino, the LGBTQ, the Muslim communities, to bridge the gap between the police department and members of those communities? And Tarek, let's start with you for that question.
Thank you for that question. Community police relations is one of the most important pillars to me as it relates to public safety, leadership, and reduction of crime. I think that when you talk about trust and legitimacy and how people believe in their police department, it is important that we establish relationships every single day. And I want to share with you my personal philosophy on community police relations, and not only community police relations, but community policing in general. It exists as a philosophy, as a statement, until we work together towards sustainable change to where we transition it from a philosophy to an action. And so for me, there are 4 pivotal pillars as it relates to community police relations, regardless of respective of whatever your background is, that we must work together on. Number 1 is going to be your city government. The police department, in my opinion, is the most public-facing section of city government. Second is going to be your home. After your home, it's going to be your religious institutions, which you just explained a little bit about, our mosques, our churches, our Buddhist temples. And then fourth, is going to be our educational system, which is going to be our school district. I think it is important that all 4 sectors of that community works together to achieve community police relations. A lot of people know that what is near and dear to my heart is the young people in our community. And so years ago, I established a program called the May Program that provided support with all 4 of those entities. We also included business stakeholders to impact young people within our community. And so I'm proud of that personally because I believe it built public trust. And not only did it build public trust, it's an honor to see some of those young men and women that were in that program that are now graduating high school and going on to college. So I believe that for us to address generational issues, for us to continue to build relationships, it is important that all 4 of those entities work together for us to see sustainable positive change and to continue to build public trust within our communities.
Wonderful. Jaime, would you like to go next?
You know, I'm very, very proud of the Arlington Police Department and what our employees have accomplished in community engagement in all varieties of the community that we serve here in Arlington. We have a geographic policing model that holds officers, beat officers, sergeants, lieutenants, deputy chiefs accountable for problem solving, community engagement, and making sure that those that want to be heard are being heard. But we do have some gaps. We have a lot of members of the community that want to be a part of us. They volunteer, they engage us, they help us. But there are segments of the community that we have not been able to reach yet. And this summer, I held 4 different community conversation virtual meetings to try to reach out into those communities so that we can begin to build new relationships with those we don't have the relationships with. So that when we do have a critical incident or we do have a certain problem in a neighborhood, we're able to establish new relationships with new members of the community that may not necessarily have the time to engage the police department as many other community members do. I mean, some people are carrying 2 jobs just to make it. But we need to be able to have exposure to them and connect with them. And through all of the social media that we are involved with, we have 25 plus programs that are community-based, community-engaged programs to address and contact all members of the community from different aspects. But we need your help. We need your help in helping us identify those that we're not connected with, those that we need to be connected with, so that we can establish relationships. Because if we have relationships, we know when there's a problem in that neighborhood, we have someone that we can engage, we have someone that we can inform, that will further inform the community so that there is no mistrust. That transparency is critical in all of our communication engagement, our community engagement efforts. One of our leaders in East Arlington calls it connecting the dots. We have to be able to make sure that we're helping each other out to connect the resources we need with the community.
Thank you, Jaime, for that. And just as you all are talking, I want to point out that Bibi as well as Jamal have also submitted questions on this very topic of how the police department interacts with these minority groups in our community. So Al, how would you answer that question?
That's a great question. The way I'll start it off is, listen, when you're talking about community policing or relational policing, as I like to say, it's a top-down approach. It has to be the chief that is out there setting the example, who is actually leading the troops down that road to where we're engaging our community to a level that is unreal. When you're talking about relational policing, I believe each and every interaction that we have with our citizens is an opportunity for us to build a positive relationship. And we have to make sure that it starts from inside the agency. I can't expect my officers to go outside the agency and to engage the community positively and have a great experience if our officers are not having a great experience with inside the agency. So leadership has to make sure that we're taking care of our officers on every level possible. The second thing I always talk about is transparency. I think we have to be transparent in every interaction we have with our communities. We have to have open and honest communication, open and honest engagement. If there's a major incident that is happening in our community, that the chief is out front, in front of the media, talking about it, so that we can actually have that transparency, so that we can build trust within the community. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the engagement. We have to make sure that we're really engaging our community, not just saying that we're doing it through a program or initiative. It has to be organizational. It has to be organizational thought. It has to be an organizational focus for the agency. The next thing is accountability. We have to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to these communities that we're serving, so that we're interacting with the Latino community, so that we're interacting with the LGBT community, so that we're interacting with the African American community. Everybody should feel that Arlington Police Department is a part of their community. We shouldn't have to say, you know what, we should have done it. We should be doing it from day one. And I can tell you, if I'm the chief here, we're going to be doing it from day one. And the last thing, or the two things that I'm going to say, is that we have to make sure, if we're talking about community policing and we're talking about relational policing, that we actually are training our folks to do the job correctly and to be able to have some type of metric system in place so that we can say, so we can actually look at the level of engagement that we have. And then the last thing I'm going to say here is this. I know that, because I do it every day in Baltimore County, if we invite our people to the table with us when we're making our policies, when we're talking about enforcing the laws inside their community, if we have some representative from the African American community, from the Latino community, from the LGBT, who are sitting at the table to help us make some great policies and procedures, and actually helping us talk about best way to engage them, I think that's going to make us a better police department, and it's going to make us a much stronger community because we have some people at the table that we normally don't have there.
Thank you, Al, for that. And Kevin?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my opening statement, it's all about building relationships. If you're not into this department and wanting to do relationships, then you're in the wrong career. You know, I think about it as in the past, we have had so many mentoring programs. Tarek's done a great, fantastic job with the May program. We have a bunch that we go into the middle schools, the high schools, the Coach 5.0 program. And it's interesting that we're very proud of what we have done, but when I go out in the community and we listen to the community, sometimes they have no idea that we have those youth and mentoring programs. So I think we're missing the boat some way. We're not reaching all the constituents. So we need to do a better job in building those relationships. And I think it comes from the top. So if I become the chief, we have constantly put pressure on what we call time on call. I call it transactional policing. You go answer the call, you take the report, and you move on. You get ready for the next call. And we put that pressure on. It's called time on call. Get off the call, move on, get the report. If I become a chief, what I want to do is build that relationship and say, I'm not so worried about time on call anymore. After the call that you handle, whether it's a criminal mischief, it's a robbery, or it's a burglary of a motor vehicle, I want you, as part of our practice to build relationships, is 2 minutes. I will accept 2 more minutes on the call from my officers if you will start to build relationships. And building that is by simple conversation. Where's your son going to school? What else can I help you with? Do you need some help with code enforcement? So it's about 2 minutes on that call. Second of all, when we talk about how good we have been in the past about building these youth programs, we're missing a tremendous amount of the population. We have 136,000 housing units in our city, and a lot of people don't know what we're doing. So we came away with just a very simple program, a front door initiative. It's a very simple program that if we get our volunteers and our officers to spend 1 hour every day of their shift, we could touch every one of the front doors, put it in Spanish, Vietnamese, we could put it in any type of language we want to our community. And what it does, it explains who our beat officers are, who you call if you have a problem, who your beat sergeant is. It talks about our youth programs and volunteerism and how you can get involved in the police department. So I think there's a lot of things we can do to reconnect with our community, and I think we do a good job, but we're still missing a large portion of it. Thank you.
And Jason.
Thank you. So I think that one real important thing, and I think that everyone kind of touched on it a little bit, is that our outreach and our engagement with our communities, it cannot be a check-the-box initiative. It has to be genuine. So when I inherited the police station 6 years ago, and I said, hey, what's our community outreach look like? And they said, well, we do coffee with a cop. And that's the example I always use. And I say, well, who are we reaching with coffee and the cop? The same 6 people show up every week who love the police and have loved the police their whole life. And there's really, I give them a lot of credit and I respect them for coming every week, but we're not getting the youth. We're not getting our marginalized communities. We're not getting a large amount of the African American community, the LGBT community. If you don't drink coffee and you don't like cops, you're not going to come hang out with us for one of those sessions. So after I found out that that's really the only thing that we did, we reached out to some community leaders and we said, how can we form programs and initiatives that are about what you want, not about what we want to give you? So we came up with a program called the Commander's Cabinet, and what we did is we brought a good cross-section of our whole community together, and every month we would get together, we would have dinner, and we had representatives from all over the different neighborhoods, but they represented the faith community, our activists, our African American community, our LGBT community, and it was really like a way for us to check in every month, have a meal together. We did some training together. We brought in, 1 month we'd bring in the SWAT team and they would talk about their role in the community. 1 month we brought in the U.S. Attorney and he talked about police-community relations from the larger national perspective. And then we really used that group as kind of a steering committee to create some of our other engagement opportunities. And that's how the Youth Connections program that we developed in the schools, that arose from a suggestion from that group. Some of our partnerships with the faith community. We started an open house at the police station that became a really popular event every year. But we used this group to kind of guide our decision making as to what programs we created. So we weren't giving the community what we wanted to give them, we were giving them what they wanted from us. And that's the philosophy that I would bring here as well.
Thank you, Jason, for that. And we'll start back down at this end, and that was a big question that had a lot of different components to it. So I think everyone went a little bit over on time, and I think that's fine for that question. But if we could kind of corral our answers to that 2-minute window, because as I mentioned, we've got a lot of questions coming in, and I'd love to get through all of them in the time that we have allotted for it. So Jaime, we'll begin with you on this question that was submitted to us from the NAACP. Do you agree that in today's society, it has become important to reallocate away from law enforcement incarceration and move them towards social services in underserved communities to relieve problems like homelessness, drug addiction, and mental health? And if so, what model for defunding the Arlington Police Department would you pursue in that manner?
Certainly the environment that we're in today and lots of conversations about defunding police and reallocating funds into other areas it's going to stimulate conversation. And we have to involve our stakeholders and our community members to have the discussions related to what do we want to take away from the police and how will that look. Mental health is one of those significant issues that is often discussed as to why are police officers dealing with mental health issues. And we have mental health professionals that work with us from My Health, My Resources. They go in the field with our officers. And the challenge is many times there's no threat in dealing with mental health patients. They just need help, they're willing to get help, and there's no issue. But when we do have an encounter that ends up in some type of physical encounter, if the officer's not there, the community is going to wonder or ask, why wasn't there police involved? And now someone is hurt. So without a doubt, looking at police reform across the country, we need to identify what does our community want us to police and how do they want to be policed? Because they have a right to say. You have a right to tell us what you want us to do and how you want to be policed. And that just is a conversation so that we all have the understanding and we're all on the same page as to where are we going to pull resources from the police department and where would we reallocate them, knowing the police department is no longer going to be providing that service. And when we look at that and we look for a model that creates that, we need to really evaluate and have conversations so that we're not confusing our community as to what the police are doing, but that we are engaging them and involving them in the conversation as to what it is we need to be doing and how we need to be doing it. Because I think we're going to have this topic at the forefront for the years to come, and it's not going to go away.
Thank you for that. Al?
So being in the law enforcement for 25 years, I can tell you over that course of time, we have taken on, as law enforcement, a lot of different responsibilities that I personally don't think that we should have. Just take for an example, we talk about the homelessness. I don't know if law enforcement should be the first responder to someone that needs some type of assistance for homeless or for a house. I could see us co-partner up with the Department of Social Service to respond there just to make sure that they're safe while they make their initial contact with the person, to provide them housing vouchers or put them up in a hotel. But us responding to those homeless problems, we can't provide them housing. We can't provide them vouchers. So that's one area I think that we probably should look to maybe defund. But here's the only thing is we want to make sure if we are defunding that piece, that somebody is picking up that service. Because the last thing I want is the homeless population to fall through the cracks and nobody's providing them service here in Arlington. The second piece that I'm going to look at is the mental health. I know from looking at the co-responder for 23 years that I know that we can't get rid of that piece where the police and the clinician is responding to somebody that is in crisis. But I don't think that a uniformed police officer should be responding to a call for a mental health person who is looking for medication. I think we have to do a better job through the dispatch system and through 911 to divert some of those calls away from us so that we can have somebody from social service or the health department to respond to get the medication to these victims. So I think we just have to look and try to make a common sense approach of it, but also too, I think that we have to have a lot of stakeholders at the table. We have to have, our government working as a team, because the last thing that I would want is for us to defund a program and that population gets left behind because nobody is providing them service to them.
How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. Homeless, we kind of talked about, Al talked about. One of the things that I came here, we were answering about 1,100 to 1,200 animal calls, barking calls, loose dogs. I kept asking, why are we answering these calls? Why isn't code enforcement doing something like this? So we made an arrangement, changed our policy. We went down from answering about 1,100 to about 100 or 200 at the most. It was saving time, officer time, and it's really more of animal services. But really the big one that we all probably up here on the stage will agree with is mental health. Mental health has been an issue, and it's been thrown on the back of law enforcement to solve the problems. And really, we've tried to push back here. We do in Arlington, and there's 77 law enforcement agencies in Tarrant County. Arlington does the most, what we call arrests, they're NEDs, necessary detainments, warrants for a person who's in a mental crisis. We do about 1,700 a year where we take custody of people that are struggling with mental crisis in Arlington and take them to JPS for mental services. And it's averaging about 4 to 5 hours of call for service that we're doing. It's a lot. And we see the same people that we continually arrest and take in for mental health services, because the hospitals usually let them go 24, 48 hours later. So I think this is something that is a national dialogue that we need to have, and we need to have that not only with the citizens, but the hospitals that are in their custody. They need to treat them. They need to care for them when they're in their care, custody, control. But also, if I become a chief here, what I would like to do is initiate a new mental health response unit, and that would be with a sergeant and 6 officers with 1 mental health clinician. So the person on mental health calls, we would go around, and that clinician would be the first person that talks to the person to ensure that we can try to get a mental health without having to have an officer use force or take them in necessary for mental health. Thank you.
Jason.
I echo my colleagues' comments completely, so I'm not going to rehash them. I just, when it comes to defunding, I think we just have to be so careful. I'm not a fan of that word. I wish we could use the word reimagining policing or reinventing policing, but when we talk about defunding, I think if you look across the country right now, you see some cities that rather than trying to take some reasonable steps like my colleagues talked about, looking for alternate ways for us to respond to people in mental health crisis, homelessness, and drug addiction. And I agree with all those things. And I do think there are different ways to handle those. And I would be welcome to those, exploring those ideas. But some places there have been calls, drastic calls, to slash police budgets by 25 or even 50%. And I think one thing that you're starting to see now with some of the cities that have actually moved on those is that it is adversely affecting the people that it was intended to help. And so to that, I say that that's, to me, I think it was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to some of the things that were going on across the country. What happened in Minneapolis was terrible, it was tragic, it was criminal. But I think to say because of an incident like that or incidents like that, we're going to cut a police budget by 50%. What happens when people in marginalized communities pick up the phone to call 911 and there are no officers available? People in wealthy communities, in gated communities, they can hire security guards. People in some inner city communities, and from talking to them, they've said, I need the police when I call 911. So I'll leave you with one thing that really kind of hit home with me that I read about. In New York City, they have an anti-crime unit, 600 police officers, and these were the ladies and gentlemen that would go after the guns every night to get the guns off the street in New York. Because of some questionable arrests, some heavy-handed tactics, they disbanded the unit recently in the wake of what happened in Minneapolis. They disbanded the unit. They saw a 277% increase in violent crimes in the communities where that unit operated. And now the black community leaders in New York City are begging the city to bring the unit back. So when we look at an issue like that, let's retrain, let's provide some retraining, let's change our policies, let's hold people accountable. But when we just slash budgets and cut officers, we're really hurting those people we really need to be helping the most.
Thank you, Jason. And Tariq?
So for me, this is a reform issue. Somewhere today, tomorrow, in the coming weeks, you're going to look on social media, as we have previously, you're going to see someone in mental crisis, or you're going to see someone that's homeless that probably has some type of mental health issue, and you're going to see an officer respond to that situation, and under duress, more than likely, that incident may end up in a police use of force incident. And so for me, I think that communities have been clear across this nation that police response to these type of calls for service is not something that they want anymore. In the city of Arlington last year, we responded to over 120,000 dispatch calls. Approximately about 5,000 calls we responded to last year had some type of mental health component to it. And so in my opinion, when you talk about defunding the police, as others have stated, it means a lot of different things. But in the context of this question, I think that people are asking us to reevaluate how we execute and how we do policing. As an organization, I think we have proactive approaches that are in place to help our citizens, especially those that are in need of some type of mental health or some type of homelessness issue. But I think we also need additional resources. You heard me talk about earlier about what community police relations means to me and having community stakeholders outside of policing to address what some of these issues are. And so outside of the proactive models that we've talked about, there are 2 national models where cities are working with private sector companies that have clinicians that respond to mental health calls for services, where people are in need or where there are homeless, and so it eliminates the police from that process. The concern that I do have in this conversation is if that situation turns violent, and then we need to respond to those particular calls for service. But I absolutely agree as it relates to what reimagining policing looks like and what police reform looks like. This is something we need to take a seriously look at, pilot it in our community, and working with private stakeholders, and how we remove police officers from answering these type of calls for service. And then we shift resources over in the spirit of understanding what defunding means as it relates to social services.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that. With police officers, and that is a national theme that is just as relevant here as it is anywhere. And we're going to dig a little deeper now into that topic. We got 3 questions that all deal with some type of civilian oversight board, both from the NAACP, from Newbie Mac, and also from Chris Sabalis, who's the president of the Arlington Municipal Patrolmen's Association. And let me try and combine those into one overall question. The establishment of civilian oversight boards to review the decisions and actions of police officers has been widely discussed as a topic of late. What are your thoughts on these boards specifically as it pertains to the subject matter competency, or the standardized selection requirements, or subpoena power, and the scope of their authority? And Al, let's start with you.
Could you just read the second part of the question?
Yes, so as we're talking about oversight boards, what are your thoughts on these boards specifically as it pertains to their subject matter competency, or their standardized selection requirements, subpoena power, or their scope of authority? So in overall terms, what is your feeling about the civilian oversight board, the conversation that is happening not only here but nationwide?
So great question. So civilian oversight boards, obviously that's a big topic as of late, and it's been going around the country. Last year, I had the opportunity to sit on the National Association for Civilian Oversight Board, and I was the only police officer there, and I was defending us very well. So here's what I think, and this is my feeling. I think that right now, where we are in our policing age, the Civilian Oversight Review Board has, or should have, a seat at our table. It's not saying that we are doing something wrong. What it's saying is that we're being more transparent in how we're carrying out our duties, making sure that our internal affairs division is going out and actively investigating these cases. And there's no doubt, I know they are, but here it is. Our communities don't think so, and they don't feel they are. So if we give the oversight committees an opportunity to review our case file, I'm not saying that they should go out and they should be able to subpoena everybody and do an own full investigation over again. I think that that will be a disservice to our internal affairs process. What I think and how it should be a balanced approach is that our investigators do their job. We actually turn over that information to the oversight committee, allow them to review the case file from beginning to end, looking at all of the evidence, listening to all of the recordings, so that they feel confident and comfortable that we did our job as an agency, and as we did our job investigating our own and holding ourselves accountable. The only issue and the only problem that I see, and if you start talking about the subpoena process and allowing them a different approach, because I know it's been happening in some places across the country, that we have, or they have been giving them authority to change what the chief or the internal affairs committee has come up with in terms of punishment. There are some officers we know, just based on how they go out and carry their day-to-day work, that they shouldn't be police officers. And the officers know it, as well as the chief would know it, and also all of the commanders know it. Sometimes these boards have the authority to overchange or override what the chief and what the internal affairs said. This person shouldn't be on the job. What that does, it's first, it erodes away the trust of the community because this person did something within the community or did something to somebody in the community. And then the second piece is it limits the chief's legitimacy inside the agency because now he can't make proper decisions in running his agency properly. So we just have to make sure if we're going to do an oversight committee or oversight, a civilian oversight, that we actually do it with a common sense approach, with a balanced approach where there is checks and balances on both sides.
Thank you, Al, for that. Kevin?
Yeah, my philosophy is that everything that we do, all our data, our crime data, our budget belongs to you, the citizens. I think we already have citizens oversight right now in our police department. We have elected officials, we have city council, we have a city manager. Those are individuals that hold us accountable to our budgets, our policies, our procedures. They are our citizens oversight in a well-organized fashion. I will tell you that I do not believe that this organization needs a citizens oversight with subpoena power. I think, as I talked about coming from the outside, that this organization holds itself to high standards. It's shown that. It holds our officers accountable through our internal affairs process. I think that we do a great job here in holding our individuals, our people accountable for what we are doing, and I think that citizens oversight is our elected officials. Now, what I will tell you is that we need citizen involvement. We have a training advisory board where we talk about how we train, our training policies, and we have 4 citizens that we put on that training advisory board. When it comes to internal affairs, I think we publish some of the discipline that we do. I think we do an adequate job of that. So I would tell you that I'm not in favor of this organization having a oversight board that has subpoena power. We need more citizen involvement. Thanks.
Jason.
Civilian oversight, it builds legitimacy, or it lends to legitimacy in the organization. So, I agree with Alex as to the model. I think having and it has to be done right. I've seen citizen police review boards across the country kind of like haphazardly thrown together where people don't understand the role of the police officer. They don't really understand how police officers, operate and the rules and regulations that govern them out in the street. So the first thing I would say regarding civilian oversight is it has to be a legitimate process by which we select the oversight board. They have to be trained in accordance with NACOL standards, the Commission for Law Enforcement Oversight. And then I favor the model where they serve as more or less as an auditing body over our internal affairs. I think that adds that layer of, we put an external eye on the investigations that are going on. I think it builds legitimacy, and if we find out that our investigations are subpar, we hold people accountable. But as far as the subpoena power, I agree with my colleagues here that you're basically going to be running concurrent investigations, and what happens if they come up with different findings. I think the best way to handle that is to allow the Civilian Oversight Board to more or less oversee or work in conjunction with internal affairs and audit them. And regarding discipline, I do think that the disciplinary action that's taken in a matter should rest with the Chief of Police. But then as the Chief of Police, if I'm not holding officers accountable when they're found, when they're sustained on complaints or they're found guilty, then that's when it becomes the city manager's job to hold me accountable. But I do think that the disciplinary action should rest with the Chief of Police.
Tarek.
So I think, again, this is a very important question as it relates to police reform. Years ago, I was a police advisor for the Dallas Police Department Citizen Advisory Board, Citizen Oversight Board. And as I said in those meetings, what I observed is citizens who were identified by council members to sit on the board and sit in a room and allow citizens to bring their concerns forward to police departments. There were certain ramifications or certain parameters that had to be in place. Number one, that citizen could not be suing the police department. The Citizen Oversight Committee had no subpoena power, but they had the opportunity to make recommendations to the city manager. And out of all of those sessions that I sat in, officers showed up willingly to talk about what those issues were, and Internal Affairs was also participatory in that process. I think really citizen oversight represents a form of procedural justice to where we see today people want to have more of a say-so in a hand in their government. I think what's interesting about our city right now, we're dedicated to finding out different ways to address issues of equity throughout our city. And so our Unity Council is evaluating our organization. I do want to tell you that I'm very confident in the processes that we have in place. I'm confident in our supervisory review. I'm confident in our Internal Affairs Department, in our Criminal Investigation Division. Oversight that we have in the community, that it must be legitimate, that it must be fair, and that it needs to have a process to it. I really don't support subpoena power, but I do support listening to what our citizens have to say. I also support listening to what the outcomes and the recommendations of our Unity Council is, and ultimately, whatever our mayor and council supports as police chief, I support as the community as we oversee and we look to continue to lead down the road of reform. But there are different sections of police oversight. There are different models of police oversight. But I don't agree with subpoena power, but I do believe that we should have different review processes that are in place as it relates to police action and being more transparent.
And Jaime.
So earlier this summer, I was actually in the interim chief's position, and I was asked the question about civilian oversight, civilian review boards. And my position at that time was that our mayor and council and our city manager's office were our oversight. They were there to ask us questions and ask us questions about particular cases and hold us accountable. But as the Unity Council was formed and Law Enforcement Committee has worked hard, they have asked a lot of really good questions that have given us the opportunity to look at things from a different lens that in law enforcement we don't typically look at. We've had members of our community in the pastoralship that have asked us really good questions that have forced us to look at things differently because they're not the typical things that we look at. And so I'm a lot more open at this point of having citizen involvement and citizen input in what we do and why we do it and how it's done than before. And I sat on a major city's civilian review board for 4 years, and I saw that process. And I wasn't very fond of that process because I didn't feel like it was efficiently accomplishing anything. In 4 years, one officer showed up to testify and give any type of information to the civilian review board. And so I'm not necessarily open to a civilian review board with subpoena power by any means, but I'm absolutely open to creating or reviewing some type of citizen involvement. I've often talked recently about a chief's advisory group where we get questioned by those in the community that they ask those questions, number one, because they may not trust. And we have to be transparent and gain their trust. And when you look at the research with civilian review boards, the ones that do have power, in only 10 to 15% of the cases do they take action against the employee. I assure you, in our accountability efforts in dealing with discipline, we take a lot more action against our employees to try to correct the behavior. And so I think it's a good conversation to have about how do we involve our citizens to give them the confidence that we are holding ourselves accountable to the highest level of the professionalism that we require in this city as it's grown over the past 3 decades.
Thank you for that. And Kevin, we'll begin with you for this next question. We did get several questions on this topic related to police unions, both from the NAACP and also from a member of the Noble organization. So let's merge it all together into this question. Will you support police unions? And what is your plan for how you would stand up against police unions or organizations when you disagree with them?
Will I support police unions? Well, we're talking about labor or unions?
Unions, organizations.
Yeah, so we have 4 labor groups. They're not necessarily called unions here. I think the unions are really more on the East Coast. Will I support them? Absolutely. These are our workers. These are our employees. I want to build that relationship with all 4 of the groups to make sure that they are in unison, they speak with one voice, that we come together. I want to hear them. It's just a procedural justice. Just the other day, you know, we've got to be open from chiefs. So a lot of times from the leadership, we think that we want to give direction all the way down. I had one of the labor groups come to me and basically give me just a golden nugget of what they thought, that we were understaffed in our homicide unit and that we needed more resources. And I took that to the deputy chief who runs that, and he was unaware that he was looking at the homicide unit and all the overtime. It was something that a labor union from a police officer was giving a chief, an interim chief, information and a problem that could be solved. Within 2 days, we made that reassignment. So I think there is value in having good relationships with our labor unions and asking them to come together to make sure that we make positive influences and changes in our policies. So yes, I feel that we will have a good relationship under my command as a chief.
Jason?
Yeah, I think a strong working relationship with the union is very important. In Pittsburgh, we're a very strong union state, very strong union area. You know, and our union and our administration, they don't always get along, and they're not supposed to always get along. But one of the things I've been very intentional about was having a very strong working relationship with the union officials, at least at my station where I worked. And you know, I've been very fortunate to have that good relationship, so when issues come up, we're able to address them proactively. And most of the time, we're able to keep them from going to arbitration or going to court because we have that very open flow of communication. I think it's important as a chief that there be an understanding of where the boundaries are. The union president in Pittsburgh, he and I work together on a regular basis, and he knows absolutely like where my line in the sand is, and I know where his is, and we just respect each other. I don't ever tolerate unethical behavior. You know, I'm pretty flexible when officers make a mistake, like I spoke about earlier, a mistake of the mind. But the union president knows if there's an officer that I disciplined and he wants to go to arbitration and fight it, if it's an ethical issue, he knows that I'm just not gonna make a deal on that. I'm not gonna be flexible on that. So I think it's just important that keep that open, honest conversation. You have that strong working relationship with your union officials, and you just know where each other stands.
Tarek?
So the main question, do I support police unions and labor groups? Yes, I absolutely do. I think our police labor groups here help us substantially in our decision making. I think we need to do a better job moving forward in ensuring that they all are included in the process. You know, we have a meet and confer process, but I think sometimes over the past several years, some of our labor groups have felt like they don't have an equal voice. So I think we can't take for granted just because we hear from one voice or one perspective of our labor groups that it's very important that we include all of our labor groups. I think that there are times that you disagree, right? And the chief has to do what he or she feels is in the best interest of the organization. But ultimately, we all have a valued interest in seeing the organization thrive. One thing I will say that labor groups normally get a negative rap because it relates to the defensive officers and personnel, especially when it comes to misconduct. But I'm proud of our labor groups here, and I've had difficult conversations and discussions with them. I'll give you an example, and I'll give the community an example of what some of our labor groups do that may not be highlighted. When we talked about our mentoring programs, if I pick the phone up and ask them to write a check to support our youth in our communities through outreach, I have no hesitation in getting a response. Officer Jillian Smith was an officer that died in the line of duty at the age of 21 here in our police department. Annually, we will have an event to recognize her life and also hand out scholarships to people in our communities. If I pick up the phone and ask them for a donation, they have no issue with supporting that. So I think it is important not only to support them, but to also understand that we have to identify ways to strategically achieve what's best for the organization. And sometimes those things differ, but I absolutely am in support of them, and I believe that they're an important part of our process as a law enforcement agency.
Jaime.
So when we talk about our police associations here in this police department, I absolutely support the representation and what they do for their membership. I've met with all of our groups. I have a relationship with all of the leadership in all of the groups. And in meeting with them, this is basically my approach, is that as an organization, they're special interest groups. Each one of them has particular things that are important to them that they want to address with administration to make the working environment a better place to be. I love APD. My entire career is here at the Arlington Police Department. I invested in this department. The people that work here are who make this department work as well as it does. And we have to support them. So where there are 4 special interest groups, I explained we have one patch, the Arlington Police Department patch. And as long as we are all working towards the betterment of that patch and that organization in our transparency with our community, in our accountability when we deal with misconduct, then we will work together to create and develop and grow to make sure the Arlington Police patch is well represented by its membership. What I'm not extremely supportive of when it comes to police associations, because we're not always going to agree, is if we don't agree that it creates a negative in their membership. That if we are actually working together, having communication, open communication, where we're transparent in the reasons we're doing what we're doing, and the association representation understands that, whether we agree or not, doesn't matter. We can agree to disagree, and I think that's important for a healthy relationship. And so as they bring issues forward, they need to have a voice. And we need to listen because they're representing people who are working in the trenches of our organization, and there might be issues that are occurring that aren't making it up to the level of administration, but that need our attention to make the environment, the working environment, the best working environment we can have for the employees that take risks each and every day they put that uniform on.
And Al, we'll end with you on this question.
So I'm from one of the states that have strong police unions. I'm all for it. You know, I think that the relationship from day one, if I become chief, is we have to actually make sure that we're getting in the room, having conversation so that we know where we are on certain issues. And it's okay that we don't agree on everything, but we have to do it amicably, and we also have to make sure that we are doing it behind closed doors. Because I don't want our relationship to play out in the media, because that's not what we need, and that's not what Arlington needs, and that's not what the police department needs. What we need, though, is representation for our men and women that are putting their life on the line every day. They need a chief that's going to support their interests, their issues. This is the way I look at it, and this is the way I see it. Whenever I'm talking about developing policies, procedures that are going to affect the men and women out on the road, I'm sitting in the office. I know what you guys do, but I don't know what you do on a daily basis down in the trenches. I have to make sure that I have not only the representation of the 4 labor groups, but I also want to make sure I have a cross-section of our agency sitting in a room so that we can make some great decisions, so we can make some great policies. But we can't do that if we're at each other's throat. And I think having support from the chief in looking at a labor union, I'm all for it. And I think that we can make great decisions, and we can make great decisions that are going to affect the community. Because ultimately what it's about is, how are we serving the community? How are we, as a team, going out and addressing the community needs? And I think that that's important, but we all have to be on the same page so that we can move Arlington Police Department forward, as well as making our community much stronger. And I think with the labor union, we can do that.
We'll begin this next question with Jason, and we got multiple people submitting something similar to this, both David Swire as well as Jason Smith and the NAACP. And so Jason, this question is your name associated with a Brady list? And if so, what were the circumstances around it?
By a Brady list, this came up earlier. We don't use that same term where I'm from, but I believe by a Brady list you mean a list where I couldn't testify in court because of integrity issues? No, absolutely not.
Tarek?
So my name is not associated with any Brady list. I truly believe in fairness, honesty, and respect. And so I don't have any issues with my name being associated with the Brady list.
Jaime?
So I have never, ever been involved in misconduct that would be reported as a reportable violation to the district attorney's office to be on a Brady list. I have yet to see a Brady list or one that is published. But as I mentioned to you in my opening comments, integrity is at the core of everything I believe in and everything I do. I have testified in criminal proceedings, in civil proceedings, in depositions, in arbitration hearings, and never, ever have I ever not been truthful in the information I have shared in my testimony.
Al?
I can say absolutely not. I don't know what a Brady list is, but I got the gist of it. It's about integrity. I think I started my first statements of talking about integrity and how I feel about integrity. I think as officers, we have to have the most upstanding trust in the community, or the community has to have that trust in us as people. Because if we can't go out and testify, if we can't go out and write a statement of charge on someone and we're questioned about that statement of charge, our utility to this organization has greatly diminished. And I think that anybody that really has an integrity issue shouldn't be a police officer, because I think our community not only wants our people to be honest, but they deserve us to be honest.
And Kevin?
I am not on the Brady list, but as a chief of police, there are times when individuals make allegations against chiefs or allegations against officers that need to be investigated. I have had an officer that was going to be terminated that made an allegation about me and my candor or my truthfulness. That investigation, where he was terminated or resigned in lieu of termination and has tried to make things public, it's been looked at by Internal Affairs. It's been looked at by the city manager, Trey Yelverton. It's been looked at by a civil court. All have been dismissed as not found any evidence, factual, circumstantial evidence, that I have made any wrongdoing of anything. So the answer is, I am not on the Brady list.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that. We'll start with Tarek for this next question. It comes from LaShawn Walker. An acknowledgement that our youth constitute the future growth and success of our community. What new or revamped initiatives can be implemented in order to promote a positive image of the police, to exude a feeling of safety instead of a feeling of fear among our young people?
So I think in order for us to address some of the issues that we see with youth in our community, particularly minority youth, that must be a key focus of our policing program. As many of you know, our city has many youth engagement initiatives. One of those initiatives I started that I talked about earlier that has shown to build police legitimacy and public trust and also address social issues with families. But I truly believe that we do ourselves a disservice if we do not admit and identify the fact that there are issues between police and minority youth, not only by what we have seen on TV, but by the generational challenges that we have dealt with. Police fear is real. It's real for a lot of young African-American males, and as we continue to face these challenges, I think that it is important for us to have critical conversations. So outside the May program, I'd like to highlight a program that I implemented as a best practice nationally in Washington, D.C. It's called Policing Inside Out. And in the Policing Inside Out program, if you would think about this, officers are in a room out of uniform, and they're sitting there with community members, young adults, young people, and they're having serious discussions. And those discussions go like this. You're a police officer. I don't like you. I don't like you because you arrested my father. Or I don't like you because you pulled us over and I thought you did there was something wrong. And those officers sat there and they had to listen, but they also had to see the issues from different lenses other than what law enforcement sees these issues through. And so I think that we must continue to evolve these type of programs outside the May program, the Coach 5-0 program, the Bridge Kids program, other programs that we have championed in our community. But we have to leave the police department and begin to go into communities and sit down and have critical conversations and dialogue and build a path forward to increase not only youth engagement, but overall family engagement.
Jaime.
Repeat the question.
So we're talking about youth and the importance of youth in our community and what programs might you enact that would help them feel less fearful of police and have more pride, frankly, in our police department.
You know, we have a number of programs that we mentioned earlier about our community engagement in our youth. And we have to continue from a beat perspective to engage youth that might be afraid of us. And we have to be proactive in doing that. So we can't just take the position of, these are the youth that want to be involved with us, let's get them involved in a program. We have to be proactive in the youth that aren't necessarily reaching out to us and reach out to them. And we can get that information from teachers, from principals, from coaches, so that we can begin to have dialogue with them to reduce any fear or anxiety that they may have when they're dealing with police. And the programs that we have had are so varied, like from the Coach 5-0 program, in our officers mentoring student athletes in high school, to pushing those kinds of programs down into the lower age schools, in middle schools and our elementary schools. So it's critically important that we touch the youth early on, so that as they grow up and grow up into young adults, being members of our community, that they have an awareness of who we are and that they can approach us if issues arise.
Al.
So juveniles, they are my passion. That makes me get up every day, especially to where I'm at in Baltimore County. I think that we have to start at an early age. You know, we always talk about middle school and high school. I think that at the elementary school level is where these kids are starting to get their foundation as young men and women. We have to get in the elementary schools. We have to start the programs where officers are going in and reading these kids' books, going in and having lunch, interacting with them on a different level. In Baltimore County, I started what was called the Cops and Kids Basketball Clinic. We ran this clinic on a Saturday 4 or 5 times a year throughout Baltimore County. We actually have now about 150 kids that show up that want to play basketball with the police officers. They get to see us in a different light. They get to see us as human beings. They get to see us in non-law enforcement ways that most kids don't. The most time that our African American kids and Latino kids see us is if we're going into their community, locking up their mothers, their brothers, their cousins, or their sisters. So we actually have to make sure that we're engaging them early and often. The other thing that I like in Baltimore County that what we have been doing is we actually started a diversion program. It's been started about 15 years ago, and it's been very, very successful. So any kid that is under the age of 17 that get locked up in Baltimore County for first offense, we actually divert them away from the criminal justice system. We are partnered up with our state's attorney's office as well as Department of Juvenile Services. So we move them away from the criminal justice system, and we actually mentor them within the police department. They have to spend, and their parent has to agree that they're going to spend a year with us. We mentor them on Saturdays. We make sure that they have to pay restitution, whether it's washing cars or paying back the victim or whatever the restitution is. But we also teach them leadership, but we also mentor them. We have a great recidivism rate. Actually, only 13% of the kids that go through this program go out and commit another crime within the first 2 years. So I think that is some of the programs that I want to bring here because I think they work. And actually, I know they work. But here it is. We just have to make sure that as a community that we're actually working together to get these youth to where they need to be, because I think that's important.
Thank you for that, Al. I'm trying to keep us all to those 2 minutes. So, Kevin, your answer.
We do a lot of those youth programs, and I would just say it's never enough. We need to continue to fight to connect with our young men and women of youth. You know, when you look at social media, it's really not our friend when you have an incident that happens and it really formulates people's fear of police officers. We just started a new program. It's called Bridge the Gap. Felicia Williams basically had her son in 2014 that was murdered, B.J. Shaw, and she formulated a nonprofit. And what she has done, she's been teaching at our academy on 3 classes about death notifications because she was so pleased of how our officers were providing empathy and sympathy time for her. So she's been teaching with us. So she came away with a proposal about how about we bring citizens together with police officers and we begin to share stories. So it's been going on for about 6 weeks now. And the last meeting they had a week and a half ago, we had 25 citizens. Some of them brought their young men, women, adults. And we had 25 officers walk into the gymnasium. And we had 30 minutes of one-on-one together where the officer got to learn everything about that citizen, that young man or woman. And the young man got to learn about the officer. Hey, I'm Kevin. I have 2 wonderful kids. This is who I am. And at the end of the 30 minutes, we asked them to stand up and tell us about who you are, your person. And they said 30 minutes is not enough. We want more. So I think there are programs like this that we need to emulate, that we need to maybe look at providing Bridge the Gap programs in each 4 of our districts. Imagine if we can continue to spread this, how we can connect with our community. But we always will need to do more.
And Jason.
Working with the youth is like my favorite thing to do at work. It's actually quite a refreshing break from some of the other stressors of the job. And as I told you earlier, put together a program called Youth Connections. And it sounds very similar actually to what Tarek was talking about. We have those really honest conversations. We don't wear our uniforms. We go into the schools in small group settings, and we really do have some uncomfortable moments, but it always leads to a breakthrough. And the officers and the young people end up sharing some very personal details, but these sessions always end with stronger relationships, and the officers usually end up encountering the young people out in the neighborhood, and they say that the dynamic is totally different. So that's, I mean, that's just a program I love, I support. I still, even though I'm not a district commander anymore, I still go out and do them because I really enjoy leading those sessions. But we do all kinds of community engagement because it has to be at every level. You can't just focus on adults or on teens. I agree with my colleagues, you have to start when some of the kids are young. So we do sessions where we meet with the Pee Wee football leagues afterwards, like once or twice a season, and we bring the whole shift and we go have dinner with the Pee Wee football leagues, because sometimes these kids' only positive experience with a police officer is that time they get to hang out with us and have dinner. Just all kinds of other engagement opportunities, kindergarten classes, doing some reading with the young people. Again, sometimes they've never seen a police officer in a positive light. And then just on a personal note, working with the youth is so important to me. I'm actually a big brother myself with Big Brothers Big Sisters, part of the Bigs in Blue program for police officers in Pittsburgh. So I actually have my own little brother as well, and it's just something I really enjoy doing.
Thank you, Jason. And gentlemen, we've got about a half hour left, and I've got a lot of questions to get through. I'm going to try and get through them all, but brevity on your part will help. I know these are weighty questions, but if you're able to shorten your answers a bit, we'll be able maybe to get through the majority of these. And I want to leave time, obviously, for your closing statements as well. Jaime, we'll begin with you on this question. It's from the NAACP. The Arlington PD, under previous leadership, has never filed a criminal complaint against an officer for the unlawful use of deadly force. Any indictments returned against an Arlington officer were obtained only by direct presentation to the grand jury by private citizens after months of delay. What is your plan for pursuing the criminal prosecution of police officers who use unlawful force against private citizens?
One of the greatest things an officer can be involved with is the use of deadly force. It's the most impactful event that an officer can be involved with. And quite frankly, officers don't come to work with an expectation or a desire to want to be involved in one of those events. But our officers are citizens as well, and they are still due process applies to our officers as well. And so as we criminally investigate an officer-involved shooting, and as we administratively investigate an officer-involved shooting, if we have a shooting that is so egregious or a critical use of force that is so egregious that we need to go ahead and pursue acquiring an arrest warrant and filing a criminal complaint, we should. However, if we have an event where the officers afford a due process and a review by the grand jury to review the events and the facts of the event, that is a system in the process that we have in place, and most all officer-involved shootings or critical incidents such as that are presented to the grand jury. And the grand jury will decide if there's enough for it to go to trial or if the officer's no-billed and was within the law in what the officer's force was. And so I think each case is independent of itself. We have to continue to evaluate each case and make sure that we uphold our Constitution and allow our officers the same due process that each and every one of our citizens get.
Al.
Sure. So the way I look at it is it's kind of a difficult situation. I don't, as an agency, want to push forward and criminally charge an officer for use of force. I think that that's why there's a court system and there's a court process that the case should go through. It gives the community an opportunity to see that the state's attorney, instead of us doing the investigation, or we're going to do the investigation, but giving it over to the state's attorney or the district attorney, how they're going to look at the case and put it before the grand jury, I think that that's a much stronger approach to have opposed to us going out and charging them ourselves.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, I understand the expectation or sometimes the frustration when the public wants immediate deposition or arrest or firing of an officer. I go back to my experience in 1991 with Rodney King, when that was clearly an abuse of force. And I remember that the state wasn't successful in the prosecution. And I was part of that dialogue, that conversation with Department of Justice and Main Justice. Do we go out and file criminal complaints and arrest these officers? Or do we allow due process and we allow the system to work in a federal grand jury to make an indictment and review all the evidence versus a criminal complaint? And sometimes I really believe that that's probably that was the best decision, even though that I may had a personal disgust of what happened or what you saw. There is a process, and I think we have to honor the process of a grand jury. But I agree with Jaime. If something was so egregious, then it might take a different approach or different look. But I want to make sure that these officers that are entrusted with use of force, that they're given due process. They deserve that. They deserve that there's an administrative investigation to make sure they didn't violate policy, but there's also a parallel criminal investigation. And that information is presented to the district attorney. And the district attorney is supposed to be that third party neutral and then presenting it to a grand jury of your peers. And I think it's a process, but I will say that I understand the frustration in today's environment where they want immediate action or results from a chief.
Jason?
I believe that every critical incident, every deadly or potentially deadly use of force incident must be thoroughly investigated. So I want to make sure I'm very clear on that. I think it should be, if it's one of our officers that uses that deadly force or potentially deadly force, it should be an external investigation. The criminal investigation should be external. But that being said, I do agree with my colleagues, that there is a process in place. It's actually, a national standard of how these investigations take place. And we would be undermining that process by making that knee-jerk reaction, that knee-jerk judgment to charge someone. And the grand juries, they are the ones with the ability to really take all of the facts and all of the evidence in and make that determination. So I do agree with my colleagues. I know it's frustrating. I've seen these situations play out, and I feel for the victims. I feel for the officers that are involved. The whole concept of use of force is it's a very touchy subject right now, but we do have a process that we have to respect.
And Tariq?
Yeah, so I share some sentiments with my colleagues as well. Use of force situations are some of the most severe situations that we look at as police departments, especially when someone has been killed by a police officer. As we know, there are two concurrent investigations that run as it relates to police use of force incidents, that being an administrative investigation and a criminal investigation. And there's a due process that's involved in that, where that case is presented to the grand jury to identify if there's going to be some type of indictment or not. But I think what people are frustrated with is when you talk about what happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we saw a man laying on the ground with an officer with his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 34 seconds. That's the type of outrage that people want to see some type of action to be moved upon. And to me, when you look at those type of situations that are egregious by nature, the police chief has to have the courage to make the best decision, which in a situation such as that, the officer should be terminated. So I absolutely agree where there are egregious situations that the chief has to have the courage to make those decisions. But again, use of force situations occur on a daily basis. The question is, was the force excessive by nature? And if it is a policy violation and a criminal violation, we should absolutely follow what their process is. And if that reflects negatively on the organization or the officers and found in violation from a criminal standpoint, they should absolutely be terminated.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that. We've gotten, just tonight, in fact, a lot of questions about racism in general, particularly within policing. We've gotten a question from Chris Sabalas, as well as Lauren and Chris Dobson. So let me summarize these. Do you believe that there is systemic racism in policing? And what have you specifically done to root out and eliminate racism within your police departments that you've worked with? And Al, we'll begin with you.
Sure, great. Give me the difficult one. No, actually, here it is, and this is what I'm going to say. Our police departments are made up of the community that we're a part of and also that we serve. So I would be naive to sit up here and say that there isn't racism within the police department or there aren't racist officers, because there are racist officers in all departments. But how do we deal with that? We have to make sure that those officers aren't acting out on their racist behavior. They're not acting out on that. So we actually, and I said it before when we started our conversation with it, is that we actually have to have an early warning system in place so that we can identify these situations where we can see the same officer where we're getting the same complaint over and over and over. When you hear a complaint that much and there's smoke, there has to be a fire someplace. We actually have to make sure that we are dealing with them on a case-by-case basis. Now, I want to say this. Do I think that everybody or there is a systemic racism in the agency? No, there are some agencies or there are some people that, just have that tendency because that's how they were raised. Some, they were raised in a different time or a different place. But unfortunately, we actually have to make sure that we're dealing with it as an agency. The other thing, and I talked about it earlier, we actually have to have those candid conversations about racism because it does exist. And for us to bury our head in the sand and say that it doesn't exist, then we are naive and we're not actually solving the problem. We are the problem. So we just have to, especially as leaders, we just have to make sure that we're having these candid conversations so that we can, as an agency, start talking about racism within the agency as outside and also as racism out in the communities. And I think that's the best way to handle it.
Kevin.
Yeah, I agree with wholeheartedly what Al said. I think we have to be careful and we have to have dialogue, and I think it really goes back to hiring. When you look at our police department, we are 52% protected class. That race and gender. So we are a very diverse organization, and we try to make sure that as best as we can that we can bring in officers that look like the community that we police. Now, I won't sit up here and say that there's not racism in our department or any department, but I think we have to work really hard to make sure it's just like biases, that we recognize what your biases are and that you ensure that you're not acting upon your biases and that you're treating people fairly and just. So I think there's an early warning program, but also I would tell you that when you look at our officers, every moment, every contact that they have with a citizen is recorded. It's recorded by a body camera. It's recorded by a DVR. Every conduct, every contact, traffic stop. So if there is an allegation of a citizen that a person is racism, we have that recorded. We would invite you to come in and let's talk about it. Let's have that dialogue on that interaction that you think that officer may have made a racial comment. Let's talk about it. And if it is true, he will be dealt with through our discipline process.
Jason.
There's racism in every organization, sadly. I'd like to think that in policing we have less than in others because of the vetting process, because of the backgrounds that we put officers through before they become police officers. But as my colleague said, I would be naive if I said, we don't have a problem with racism. There's racism in every organization. Do I believe that it is systemic and prevalent in policing? I guess it depends on the agency. I can tell you that in my agency now, I don't believe that's a problem. I believe what is more of a problem is the implicit biases. Some of the preconceived notions we have based on how we were raised and how we grew up. Both of those are bad, right? Whether you're making a racist decision or a biased decision, they're both bad. It's not an excuse. But the difference is that you can't train away racism. But bias, we can do something about, and we do. We have comprehensive training and implicit bias. And then after the training, we got to hold officers accountable, just like my other candidates up here said. Whether or not it's systemic, when we see it, we have to call it out, and we have to hold officers accountable. And when we do that, that's when our organization will be deemed as legitimate.
Tariq.
As I stated earlier, I think it's very important that we speak truth to power on these particular issues. I do believe that there are racist police officers across this country. I do believe that there are racists in every institution. Do I think that the institution of policing is defined by racism? No, I don't. I do think officers' behavior within this institution affects negatively on the work that we do every single day. I view excessive use of force and racism in the same light. There is no place for it in the police department. There is no place for it in the Arlington Police Department. And I want to make that very clear, as not only as a police executive, but also as a police chief. It is important that we identify what these issues are. We've seen officers make racist tweets online. We've seen it on social media and other police departments across the country. And so when we see it, we should check it, we should address it, and there's no place for it in the police department.
All right, and Jaime, will you finish this out?
I think we all can identify that there's racism in every profession in this country. And certainly there is racism that exists in policing across the country. But what we have to be aware of is I don't believe it's systemic. I don't believe it's as big a problem as some perceive that it is. And so as we have our tripwires in place to look for racist motivated traffic stops or any other type of racism that is occurring within our organization of which we control, we need to make sure that we're having the conversations with our employees. We know we all have a bias, and we need to be aware of what that bias is and make sure that it is not impacting our decision-making by any means. So we need to make sure and continue the training, the enforcement of our policies to ensure that if there is some biased behavior or racist behavior that is occurring in the organization for which we control, it's not going to be tolerated. It's not going to be tolerated. We just cannot allow it. We need to have our community trust us that we're policing them fairly and equitably, and that they see a uniform, they can trust the person in that uniform is going to do the right thing for the right reasons at the right time.
All right, so this is our final question before we get to our closing statements, and I think it's a good question for us to end on as you kind of gravitate toward your closing statement. And we got a stack of questions about this very topic, which is leadership. Connie asked about, how do you stand up to the pressure? The front line asked about being a quality leader. Chris Sabalos asked about strategic planning and how would you govern. As I said, there's a list of them, but I think Michael Jacobson may have summarized it best with this question, and we will begin with Kevin as we go through the row here. What is leadership, and what are your key attributes that make you a strong leader?
Leadership is about relational leadership, and that I'm very relational. So leadership is really about listening and giving everybody a voice. As a chief, it's really easy to submit a policy or an executive director, but it really doesn't it's being implemented by the workforce. So leadership is making sure that my command staff has an opinion, and that opinion can be open dialogue, and it's okay for us to disagree. It's okay for our police officers to submit suggestions. It's about listening, it's about team-oriented, it's about building consensus, even though that every decision we make may not be consensus. But leadership is also about being visible. It's about being available. It's about living like you want your officers to live, with integrity and credibility, and making sure that everybody is working together. It's not about me. If I'm the chief, it's not about me. It's about us. It's about us as an organization. It's about us providing a service to our citizens. It's about us being great partners to all the other city services that we provide. So I say leadership, I always talk about it, it's relational. And everything we do, we have to build those relationships and develop trust amongst each other.
Jason.
For me, leadership is about just being visible, being willing to listen, and then being responsive as well. And I think a lot of times that's, at least in my own experience, that's where some leaders have failed. They know there's problems, and sometimes they listen to the problems, but they don't either solve the problems or create an avenue for the problems to be solved. So I think being a leader, especially in policing, 21st century policing, being responsive to the needs of the officers and being responsive to the needs of the community is paramount. And I think probably the most important thing is being willing to make tough decisions, even when they're not popular decisions. I think a lot of times where some leaders have gotten themselves in trouble is they want to be liked. And everyone wants to be liked. I mean, it's human nature. But sometimes being in that seat where you have to make those decisions, you have to understand that you're not going to be liked all the time, and you have to be still willing to make those decisions. For me, I would think the four key characteristics, at least that I kind of employ on a daily basis as a leader, is being of high integrity. For me, that's a no-brainer. If you don't have integrity, you have nothing. Being compassionate, being fair with everybody, and also being collaborative and being willing to listen and work as a team.
Thank you. Tariq.
So I'm going to tell you this, the topic of leadership and being a police chief in law enforcement right now is a very challenging position to be in. I've talked to several police chiefs around the country over the last several days, major city police chiefs, some that have been fired and some that have stepped down because of what their ethical belief system is. I will tell you personally that I think that leadership is investing in people. It's going beyond management. We manage tasks every single day in the police department, but it's preparing people for life. It's making those difficult decisions. It's doing what's right in the face of controversy, chaos, but ensuring that you are doing what's right for the department, the community, and the city. And so what core values do I have as a person? I ask people to judge me off of who I am. I believe I'm a person that is honest. I believe that I'm a person that is fair, that tries to listen. And I believe that I'm a person that lives the life that I've exhibited in this organization for the last 17, approaching 18 years.
Jaime?
Leadership in law enforcement is a huge responsibility. Values like integrity and character and honesty, trust are all key elements to being able to be a leader where your troops are going to follow you. Because we're all human and we all make mistakes. But as long as we have candid conversations, as long as we are working towards transparency and giving people, our employees, the opportunity to have a voice and be a part of the decision making in the organization, then collaboratively we have more buy-in. And it's much easier to lead an organization when you have collaborative buy-in into where it is you're going and what the mission, vision, and values are of the organization as they press forward. And that can't occur without citizen input. That can't occur without community input as well. And so I pride myself on being open and honest and a leader in our organization, listening not only to the community, but listening to our employees so that we can create the greatest environment where people come to work feeling happy each and every day to get the job done. Because if you treat your people well, they're going to do the job well, and the community is going to benefit from that.
And Al, will you give us our last answer for the evening?
So for me, I think leadership is about mentorship. It's about developing your people that work for you, because you want to make sure that your agency is much better when you leave than when you came. And you have to start thinking as a leader, you have to be a visionary. You have to start thinking, what should I do? Where should we be 5, 7, 10 years from now? A lot of that, in part, being a leader is thinking about succession planning and making sure that we're moving the agency forward. Leadership is also about empowering our people to do their job. Because listen, I want my folks that work under me to be able to go out and feel comfortable enough to do their job. I don't want them to ask me permission to do their job. I want to empower them to make sure that they can carry out their job. Leadership is also about inclusiveness, making sure that everybody within the agency feel that they're of value, a valued resource. You know, as leaders, we always talk about, our officers are our most valued resource. Do we really feel that way? Are we treating them that way? And I can tell you, under my leadership, I will. I want to make sure that each and every officer in this agency, when they come to work, they want to come to work because they have a leader that cares about them. And let me tell you how they know that they care, or that they know that I care. Because I'm going to get out of the office. I'm going to be a visible leader. I'm going to make sure that you have accessibility to me. And I think that's important. And also, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to listen to the ideas that you have. But here's the thing that I'm going to provide, and I think the thing that's most important. Not only do I listen to you, but I am going to provide you feedback so that we close the gap, we close the circle, so we come full circle, so that you know that I'm supporting you. And the last thing I'm going to say about leadership, leadership is not from a place of position or power. That's not leadership. You want your people to follow you, not because of your position, but because they respect you as a person and as their boss. That's what leadership should be about.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We now are at our closing stage of this event, and we want your closing comments. Each of you have 2 minutes to do that and to continue our fairness in who starts and who ends. Jason, you'll be going first in your closing statement.
Thank you. I've wanted to be a police officer since I was 5 years old. This has been my dream job, and I've been very lucky to have a very good career in Pittsburgh. I love my city. I love my department, but I realized that I want to do greater things, and I'd like to have that opportunity to implement some of the initiatives and programs and some of the great successes we had in Pittsburgh and in Zone 5 in other places. So as I started to look for jobs all around the country, and there's a lot of police chief jobs opening up now, it's just important to me that I find an organization that shares the same values as I do, and I think you had the chance to hear some of those values tonight that I spoke of that were important to me. And that's one of the things that led me to apply here in Arlington. This police department has a great reputation nationally. When I told people back in Pittsburgh that I was a candidate for the job here, they said, wow, Arlington's like a really nationally known as a leader in policing. And so that meant a lot to me that I was selected as a finalist here. I'm not looking to bounce all around the country. I'm looking to make one move and call that place home. And I would like for that to be Arlington. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Jason. Tariq?
Sure, so I'll just say this in closing. I've truly appreciated engaging in conversation and dialogue over tonight to talk about some of the issues, to listen to the community. But I'll close by sharing the experience with you real quickly. A week after Congressman John Lewis died, I was in Selma, Alabama, and I walked 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery. And on day 2 of that walk, I was kind of overcome with emotion. I thought about our officers in this department. I thought about what was going on across the community. And I thought about myself as a leader and what I desire to be. And I've been with this organization, I stated previously, my entire adult professional law enforcement career. And I want you to know I'm committed to this organization. I want you to judge me off of my record, not by what I say, but by what I've done. I've been active in this community. I've engaged youth in this community. I walked side by side with our officers. I've had difficult conversations, even at the time of chaos and tragedies in this community. 3 things I learned that I want to share with you from walking from Selma to Montgomery on that 54-mile journey. Number 1, I was stopped by people who I did not know, and they said, thank you for what you're doing. My takeaway from that was, I see you. The second thing is they said to me, is that I hear you after we had discussion and dialogue. The last thing I want to share with you is that they pointed out to me that we all need to be accountable. I want you to know, if selected as police chief of this city, the officers in this department and the people in this community, I want you to know that I see you. I not only want to engage in dialogue, but I'm going to follow up with some type of action to tell you that I hear you. And the last thing, regardless of where we're at, regardless of what's going on, we all have to be accountable to each other. We have to be committed to the future of this organization. And all of these gentlemen have a lot of law enforcement experience as well as do I. But the question is, this job right now is about fit, who's going to lead this organization forward, and I truly believe I'm the person to lead this organization to the future. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any other additional questions after we're finished.
Thank you, Tariq. Jaime.
So I've spoken a lot about integrity and transparency tonight, and I want to share with you how impactful it is to me. Because earlier I was asked a question that I kind of dodged. I should not have been caught off guard, but I was caught off guard. And that had to do with the Brady List. And I'll tell you, in 1998, I made an arrest of one of our off-duty police officers for DWI involved in a crash. And the method that we collected evidence in the horizontal gaze and nystagmus that was utilized at leadership's direction was not the way that we were trained to do it. And to fast forward, we went to trial, and we lost the trial. That's 1998. If you fast forward a number of years, there was a DA changeover. And it was discovered that district attorneys were creating these documents on evaluating officers that, in my opinion, was without merit. And they made comments on some of these forms that, in my opinion, were not true, were not right. And I have to confirm that my name is on the Brady List, because it was brought to the attention of our department that I was one of the officers who those grading sheets had referenced. I have never, ever been untruthful in a proceeding. And for my name, if it's still on that list, as they brought forward when they found these documents, should not be on that list. But I have no recourse. None of the officers that were identified in these improper evaluation forms have a recourse to challenge what that prosecutor wrote on those evaluation sheets that other prosecutors could review as they were trying to go to their trials. I did my job. I arrested one of our officers for misconduct off duty, right? And so this hasn't come up in years. And so I don't want anyone to think I dodged the question that I was misleading anybody. And it's important enough to me in my integrity and transparency that I clear that up tonight than for it to come out at some later date that my name exists on that list, which it may still exist on that list. But it's not because I was not honest. It was not because I was not truthful in my testimony, because I have my father's name. My father gave me my name, and I will never tarnish his name by being dishonest or untruthful. And the manner in which the DA's office was handling those evaluations, in my opinion, was improper, because if I had done something wrong, they should have reported it to my department, or they should have taken action against me personally or criminally. And so it was important to me enough by the time we got to the end of the night that I just share that with you, because I don't want there to be any perception of me misleading this community and this police department, who I have all the passion and the love for. And I believe that I have the traits, and I have the character, and I have the leadership ability, as shown before, to lead this department as we go in to more difficult times in the future.
Thank you, Al.
First, I just wanted to thank my colleagues for being here tonight. I think that each of you have done a fantastic job. Also, I want to thank the city of Arlington for putting on such a great process. It was a difficult and long process, but I just want to thank you for your time and your effort, because I know selecting the police chief here is probably going to be one of the most difficult tasks that the city manager and the deputy manager are going to have to do. But I just want to start out by saying this. When I actually started this process, I really thoroughly looked at Arlington really in depth. You guys have a very, very professional police department here, and you guys are doing some wonderful things. I'm not here, or I don't want to come here and make sweeping changes when I get here. I want to be able to understand what you do on a daily basis. I think it's important for us, or for me, to look at when I do get here. I want to make sure that I'm going to be really involved with the community. I think relational policing and getting out into communities and building that relationship and starting from day one is so important for a chief. And I can tell you from day one, I'm going to be building relationships inside the agency, and I'm going to be building relationships outside the agency. And I think that if we can actually build those relationships and we can come together as one, police department and community, we're going to be a much safer Arlington. So I just wanted to say again, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this process. It was a fantastic process, and hopefully I'll be here in a couple of months. So thank you.
Thank you, Al, and we'll end with Kevin.
Thank you. I'm also honored to be one of the 5 finalists here. There's some great men to choose from here with some great experience. You know, I just want to say that, you know, if past performance is like future, you know, 37 years, 25 of that's been in leadership. And I've been tasked with various assignments all over the world in dangerous environments to lead men and women. And I think it's all about leadership, and it's all about, if I get selected, it's about bringing that leadership here. I want to bring some of that outside leadership that I've been fortunate enough to receive. Not only just with command staff, but start off with sergeants and lieutenants and show them that there is a way to lead. And leadership can be taught if you're open to different ideas. So that's one thing. Second is, again, relational policing. I want to build the strong relationships not only with the community, but that workforce and that labor group. And then, like Jaime, I want to bring up the Brady list. It kind of caught me off guard too, because Jaime and I both have been attacked by some labor individuals at times, and we have both been found exonerated or clear of any wrongdoing. So if my name is on the Brady list, I'm unaware of it. I've been told that it's not. But we don't have any appeal process if someone from the outside makes accusations about some conduct or truthfulness of us. It goes to the district attorney. They make the determination, and they don't tell you what their policy is. So I know Jaime may or may not know he's not on it, and right now I don't think I'm on it either. But I just want to be open, and I don't want you to walk away with thinking that I know I'm on it or was on it and don't know about it. So with that, I just want to say thank you. It's been a great opportunity. I look forward to the final decision and welcome whoever that person is into our organization. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I also want to take a breath for all of you, because that was a really fast-paced 2.5 hours. Let's give them a round of applause for the work that they did tonight. We want to thank you for being willing to answer those questions, some really probing, outstanding questions from our community. For those who are here tonight, thank you for coming out and spending 2.5 hours of your night. Not a lot of people would, and we're appreciative that you would. And for all you at home, we're also thankful that you tuned in tonight and that you participated in the process. And that is a community process, and we're lucky to have a community that is as engaged as what we have here in Arlington. What happened here tonight will help inform our community and our leaders, so that at the end of this process, we'll end up with the best police chief for this department, for our organization, and for our community. So thank you again for coming out, and candidates, thank you for being a part of the process.